Today we begin with Psalm 81. Sing aloud unto God our strength. Make a joyful noise unto the God of Jacob. It's a worship psalm, and it is again filled with just adoration and worship to him. Because for this statute for Israel and a law for God of Jacob, he ordained in Joseph for a testimony when he went through the land of Egypt, where I knew not a language and I understood not. The idea that I was not deserved of the wonderful of God who came and who saved me. He talks about he removed my shoulder from the burden, his hands have delivered from the pots. Thou callest in trouble, and I delivered unto thee. I answered thee in the secret places of the thunder. I proved thee at the waters of Meribah. The word I in there is intermixed in this psalm, to where some of it's the psalmist talking, and then some of it is God himself talking. It's a relationship worship orientation about how wonderful he is. Let's worship him. And he's also saying, I was the one who brought you out. I was the one who heard you in trouble, and I delivered thee. O my people, I will testify to thee, O Israel, if thou wilt hearken unto me, there shall be no strange gods in thee. Again, one of these psalms that uses the word I a lot. And it's again God speaking. And it's wonderful to hear God speak in a psalm. We don't stop and realize how important and beautiful that is. That it's not just speaking and worshiping a God who accepts that, who stands there august, supreme, and separated. But here's a God who gets into the joyfulness with you. And he talks with you, says, I am Yahweh, thy Elohim, which brought thee out of the land of Egypt. Open thy mouth wide, and I will fill it. I will do this. I love this psalm a lot because he says, but oh, that my people had hearkened unto me, and Israel had walked in my ways. Stop and read this for what it is. It's an interaction between the worshiper and God himself, and God is interacting. I should have subdued their enemies and turned my hand against their adversaries. The haters of the Lord should have submitted themselves unto him, but their time should have endured forever. He should have fed them also with the finest of wheat, and with honey out of the rock should I have satisfied thee. The idea is, again, that these enemies are there. And sometimes the enemies are inside of Israel. But the idea here is that you have this worshipfulness and this God who is responding is, yes, I did this. Yes, you're a part of me. Yes, I'm historically moving in for you. And, oh, I love that one. Open thy mouth wide. Call upon me. Open your mouth wide, and I will fill thee. It's a beautiful psalm. It has a lot of strength to it. Going back to Deuteronomy 18. Remember, we are reiterating the law, but this time it's again to a people who will be using this law and who will be taking this law into their lands when they're spread out, when they're in the borders, and when the leaders will be responsible for the people keeping these laws, and the household leaders and the governmental leaders, the rulers over the thousands and the hundreds and the 50s. And so he talks about the portions of the priest, that God has chosen them out. And he talked about a prophet in 18, and that prophet would be Christ. So we're getting a running start about this. I really want to reiterate again the presumptuousness of Christianity, and presumptuousness of these groups of people who thought, well, I can just do it this way. I can just do it that way. I can just worship in this grove. God won't care if we have this idol. He won't care if we do this on this day. You know, it's the word he won't care. That you can just do anything you want to God, and he's just going to love you. He loves us in Christ, but he also chastens us. He wants us to stand for a certain standard. He wants us to be his ambassadors, not just representatives of love alone, or peace alone, or unity alone. He wants us to stand for him. We see this, again, you can read the end of 18 with presumptuousness. And it's a dangerous thing to do, to be presumptuous. When we look at 19, he reminds them that he has set up these cities of refuge, because these people also will be responsible for their own security and for their own justice. Again, you're going to be separated out. You're going to have these cities. There's 6 of them, 3 on one side of Jordan, 3 on the other. If someone kills by accident, and he even gives an example. The good thing about this law is he'll give an example. So we'll see an example here of what God says, that if a man goes into the wood with a neighbor and he fetches a stroke of the axe and it slips and he kills his neighbor by accident, just as an example, that he is to go and exist in the city of refuge. That way, so the avenger of blood, the next of kin, won't go and find him and kill him. And then we have this round robin of you kill, I kill, I kill, you kill. They will sit in the city of refuge because of an accidental murder, and he will stay there till the high priest dies. Then he's free to come home. But if he leaves that city, his blood will be on his own head if he's found by an avenger of blood. And he talks about this. Let the avenger of blood pursue the slayer while his heart is hot, and overtake him, because the way is long, and slay him, insomuch as he hated him not aforetime. So be very careful when we're dealing with murder that's not premeditated. Now, if it is, that is taken to the courts. That is taken with, again, we talked about it earlier, about the two witnesses, two or more witnesses that will make a statement, and their hands will be the first one to kill the murderer. But they do not want innocent blood shed in Jerusalem. Innocent blood will not be shed. And he talks about that. He talks about hating your neighbor aforetime and lying in wait. The elders of the city will come against that person and judge him. And he also mentions that you may or may not steal from your neighbor. You may not remove landmarks where someone says, this is my land. No, this is my land. You're moving landmarks. You have to leave things where they are. Wherever the borders have been established, you must adhere to those borders. He talks about the laws of the witnesses. Again, this is something laid out, that nobody is killed or put to death on one witness. You can see the problem that would have. But it must be two witnesses, and there must be no false witness. Remember, bearing false witness, it was mentioned in the Ten Commandments. That also, that's not just lying, that someone says, do you like this shirt, or do you like these shoes? Some lie like that. It's to lie in court, to bear a false witness for purpose of gain. Now, I'm not saying that it's okay for Christians to lie. If I don't like your shoes and you ask me, I'm going to tell you I don't like your shoes. Don't ask me, a straight question if you don't want an honest answer. But here we go, that anyone who bears a false witness will get the penalty. And we mentioned this earlier. You'll get the penalty, so you better be careful what you say. In chapter 20, we're talking about military service, and I thought this was interesting, how he's building a strong militia. Real interesting to go through this, because he says that you're going to go out to battle, but I'm going to go with you. I'm going to be the captain. For is the Lord your God is he that goeth with you to fight for you against your enemies, to save you. He's not a God who sits in heavens and says, you go fight, I'm way up here. He gets into the battle. In fact, he leads the battle. But I like what he wants, the strongest and most willing warriors. He asks the officers to go in and says, has anybody built a new house? Well, then go live in that house. In case you're killed, that somebody else will live in that house. He asks these people, do you have a vineyard, or do you have a wife? Or, okay, well then you need to go back, or you have the choice to go back. This is not indentured servitude to the military. This is not the draft. This is voluntary for warriors who want to go into battle. He even has something there for people who are afraid. If you're afraid and you're faint of heart, then go back. He only wants the strongest people, because the battle is the Lord's. It's not a matter of numbers. He can easily whittle this way with honesty. If you went from 30,000 to 3,000, it's the same God. So he's really not saying numbers are how I'm going to beat this. No, we beat this with God. So he sets up this army of people who want to be there, who are willing, who already have their houses all established, who have their vineyards established, who have their wives and their family is established. And when you come against the city to fight, there's some interesting things at the end of 20, which some people have a hard time with. He starts talking about what can happen in war. And again, they are to go in first as ambassadors. We're coming. The strong, mighty king is coming. Do you want to have peace? And if they say peace, then they become a tributary. They become people who work and who pay tribute, who pay taxes, who pay extra monies to exist within that land. It's okay to do that. But you also must get rid of your foreign gods. So it's very important that they do this. And these people, it says in 11, that they would come tributaries and they will serve you. Again, this isn't racism. But the people who stay will serve the Israelites because they're the people of God. This is how God's establishing it. Again, but he says in other places, when you have servants, you will not lord it over them. You will not vex them. You will not treat them cruelly because you were bondsmen before. Remember where you have come. And there are certain rules for how they treat servants and how they should, be able to let them go. And under certain circumstances, they take their wives and kids with them. So again, these people, if these people aren't servants, they'll be masters. That's the problem we see here. If either the people of God are the masters under God, and the people have to be the servants, or else the evil people will be the masters. There is no equality. There is no sharing of power between sin and righteousness. God knows this, and he wants his ways to prevail. But he does go in that if you do besiege a city, they've said no. They understand that this is the powerful God coming, and they say no. You can go in, wipe them as a dish. But you can, and you are to wipe the little ones and the women. You are to wipe, and it sounds cruel to our ears when I read through 13 through 17. How that you are to take to thyself and you'll take the spoil. Do this to all the cities that are very far off from thee, which are not the cities of these nations, but of the cities of these nations, which the Lord God doth give thee for an inheritance. Thou shalt stay alive nothing that breathe. The idea here that when you're fighting for the nation of Israel, you will take them all. Nothing will be left. Everything is clean like a plate. You'll clean the houses. You'll get rid of the imagery, and you get rid of all the little ones and stuff. You can take spoil of the cities, by the way, on here that are not within Israel proper. So if they did establish out, as it looks like they would have in the future, those cities they could take spoil. But the ones inside, they could not. So again, a difference there between 14 and 16. And it says you'll utterly destroy them. As the Hittites and the Amorites and the Canaanites and the Perizzites. And here's the reason why they do this. That they teach you not to do after all their abominations which they have done unto their gods, so that you sin against the Lord your God. This is always about sinlessness. You have to get rid of sin completely and all these remembrances of sin. And you'll see these when these children grow up, or when these people grow up, who is that? Well, that's a Hittite. What did the Hittites teach? Well, let me tell you about them. And all of a sudden, sin keeps growing up. Sin keeps living. And God wants this to be a sinless place. Now, before people think that this is harsh and cruel, remember that when we didn't think much about the little ones when we went to Japan and dropped the bombs at Hiroshima. We didn't think about the old people and the little ones when we just bombed indiscriminately German cities in World War II, when we pushed napalm in Vietnam, and when we went into battle in Iraq. We didn't care about the civilians that died in that battle and the harshness and the cruelty that happens because of these things. So we have to be careful that we aren't, drawing a fine line, because we are guilty as a people, as human beings, of being ferociously evil. God is not being evil to people. He's creating a bench head to where people who want to leave can leave. But if you're going to stay, you're going to get wiped out. And this is God moving to clear out. Now let me tell you something. God hates sin so much that he killed his own son. We don't stop and realize that. Oh, that God would hate sin and wipe out old people and young people and wipe out entire cities. Oh, that's what a horrible God is. Yeah, but he didn't spare his own son. We tend to forget that his own son was innocent. His own son had never sinned and would never sin. We know that all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. And all beings born of Adam after the fall would sin and are sin and will sin. But yet Jesus was sinless. So we need to balance our perspective. That's what this whole thing is about, is balancing the perspective of how we view things. And sometimes I think we're viewing things incorrectly. We need to balance it out. And we have to do it. Now, he is not saying this to the Christian, by the way. Now, when he comes back and works through Israel again, you might see some of this come about. But in this time, we are at the first part of this. The church is the part that goes up and wants to make peace with the world. We're still trying for 2,000 years to say, God is coming, it's time to make peace. God is coming, time to make peace. This is the church. This second part in end times will be God with Israel, going in and standing for righteousness when he comes back, standing for justice, and standing against sin physically on this world. So again, there's something messianic about this. So no, we're not supposed to take swords against the sin. We're supposed to preach against it, stand against it, because God hates sin. So when we see this, it's because they teach you not to do after, that they teach you not to go after their abominations. The worship of every god contains abomination, either fornication, adultery, polygamy, violence, bloodletting, hypersexuality, unfair economics, cultural racism. All these different things are there. All the things that are abominations, sometimes their diet, sometimes the way they approach God, sometimes the blasphemous services that they do, that's an affront. We don't see a sin as an affront to God. We see it as you need to get over it. Well, it's like somebody steps on your foot. Just get over it. Come on, man. It's just a light thing. It's not. It's so serious that his son died. So I think we need to use the cross sometimes as a perspective, even though it hasn't happened yet. But let's look and see what's happening here. And when you besiege a city a long time and make a war against it, don't destroy the trees that are for meat. That you don't want to destroy the trees because you're going to be eating off of these trees, which is kind of foolish. You can destroy the trees to create these bulwarks, to create these ramps. You can do it with the trees that don't create fruit. In 21, it's interesting because he talks about unsolved murders, that if there's innocent blood shed within your city, what the leaders need to do. And once again, this is very specific to what a local government would need to do. You find a dead body, and the elders come out. They take a heifer, and the people put their hands on the heifer, and they swear before God that they know nothing about this. We don't know how this man or woman was killed or whatever, whoever. We don't know how this was. Innocent blood was shed. And we're swearing with our hands on the heifer that is beheaded in the valley, because they slay a heifer. They slay the heifer because of this sin that has happened. But they all get together and say, our hands have not shed this blood, neither have our eyes seen it. They're swearing before God. Be merciful, O Lord, unto thy people Israel, whom thou hast redeemed, and lay not innocent blood on thy people Israel's charge. God has always hated innocent blood. When bloodshed in innocence, when someone's just living their life and you kill them, when someone's just going through your territory and you murder them, when someone is killed, there needs to be justice. But here, this is also, I put a note in my Bible, this was the sin that got God's attention at Sodom. It wasn't just the hypersexuality and some of the other things going on, but it's the fact that they were a people who would shed innocent blood. This is the idea of innocent blood shed on your properties, or on your waysides, or near your highways, or near your cities, or even in your cities, that you could just kill indiscriminately. And they want to put away the guilt of this innocent blood that was shed, because again, that goes back to Abel. Remember, God told Cain that the blood, your brother's blood, calls out to me from the ground. One wonders if that is rhetorical, figurative, or actually there's something about blood that calls out to God. Could be both. It's something to think about. Also, we have to finish this chapter off talking about taking captive wives. Now, this is not, I hate these, I really hate these, things that are added here, kind of explanations of what's to come, because many of them are misleading. This is not about taking captive wives. If you are going into war, and it's one of these places where you can take spoils, and you see someone, she's not property. She's not a piece of gold or a piece of silver you just grab and throw into a tent and do what you want and get rid of. He actually has a rule of how you might bring her in as a proper wife. Women are not property. Women are not to be taken as property. But if a man sees her and wants to pursue this, but she is not of Israel, she is of another, she is a spoil of a war, then he may do certain things here. And if he doesn't delight in her, then he may not sell her, because she is not merchandise. It even says that here. But thou may not sell her for money. Thou shalt not make merchandise of her. Women are not property. They are not to be made merchandise of. So it's very important. There's an interesting 15 through 21, where here he talks about multiple wives. But let's be careful here. Let's be careful. He's not saying you can have 2 wives. What he's saying is, within that multi-nation, within Israel at that time, within that nation that comes over and takes the land, there are men who had 2 or more wives. Remember, they went from a lawless state in Egypt, then out in for 38 years, there was really no laws directly talking about the taking of multiple wives. This will come later. But God does want 1 man, 1 woman. But he's saying here that if there are 2, and it seems like this is a specific thing. Once again, sometimes there's specificity with the Gospels. Sometimes the Gospel is, not the Gospel, but the Scriptures here are talking about a specific. Remember the specific with the daughters of Zephaniah. They had a specific argument to be made about land ownership. Here we see a specific argument. Maybe 1 man had 2 wives. And this is a story of a man that has 2 wives. And he loves the son of the loved wife, which is the second wife. And he hates the first wife. He cannot give birthright to the second son. The birthright must go to the first son. Whether you love or hate the wife is irregardless of birthright. So it seems like we're going through a whole thing here in 15, 16, and 17 that seems a little more content specific about how that men are supposed to do when they're dealing with sons from different wives. Now, this is not saying men should have multiple wives. In fact, every time you see multiple wives in the Old Testament, it creates hardship, it creates godlessness, it creates murder, it creates the worship of other gods. It is a big problem. Let me go back and say it doesn't create murder. I was thinking about Bathsheba, what it was doing with Uriah. But there was a guy who did have 2 wives, and there was no murder involved. But boy, did he have a rough life, and that was Jacob. So he's talking about this. And if a man is stubborn, in 18 through 21, we're dealing with if they won't hearken to the people, he won't hearken to his parents, then the parents can take him to the elders of the city and tell him he's a stubborn, and all the men shall get their stones and kill him, because he is not he's not honoring his father and mother. And again, that's a commandment of God. It's not a commandment of man. We don't get to pick the commandments and say you die for murder, but if you disobey your parents, well, slap on the wrist. Or if you tell a lie, well, no. They've created capital crimes here, and they must be just. Sin has a just punishment, and that punishment is death. This is why Jesus came. He died to fulfill the just needs of the law. I know I feel like I'm running through this a bit, but it's very interesting things. Wade in there a bit. Stop and see what's there, and you have to defuse yourself from our culture, which is hard to do. You've got to kind of pull back from our culture a bit and see what's there, even if it doesn't fit the way we are being taught, and see what God's really saying. And he ends this chapter talking about if a man's committed a sin worthy of death and he's been put to death, thou shalt hang him on a tree. So you can hang someone on a tree, but you have to take them down by evening, because he that is hanged on a tree is accursed of God, and that thy land be not defiled. Again, this one's tied to why they were taking Jesus down from the cross, that the land would be defiled. You cannot have a dead body on a cross or on a hanging from a tree, which they would still technically consider this part of a tree. You see how that they're trying to also keep the land from being defiled. You get the idea that sometimes in these cities they would just hang people and let them hang for days, just like they used to do the crucifixions. When they would crucify people, they would just leave them crucified on a highway or out in a field or wherever they did crucifixions until they decayed. At least in Jerusalem proper, they were like, no, we need to take them down. We can't allow decay to be in our city or in our areas. So God has set this up that even if you are justly hanging someone from a tree, you cannot let it decay and defile the area. This is one of the reasons why it says that talked about the Holy One will not see decay. The idea that they embalmed him before his body could start to decay. I know I've said a lot, and this is kind of a longer video right now, but it's important once again that we look at the grid, and the grid is going to call out to us. The grid is going to tell us things that maybe we aren't aware of, maybe we don't hear in our churches, maybe goes against our own Christian sentimentalities. You know, we want to be compassionate and we want to be kind, and all of a sudden you're talking about killing people and you're talking about justice and judgment instead of just love. But let me tell you, the first thing is justice and judgment and the eradication of sin. If we do not take care of justice and judgment and eradication of sin, there's no way to spread the love of God. Because the love of God begins with the eradication of sin to take away the enmity between the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent. We need to take away the enmity. We need to take the enmity. There are scriptures that says that friendship with the world is being an enemy with God. And this is a struggle we have in the 21st century, that our minds are so worldly oriented that it's very hard sometimes when we see things in the grid like we're seeing right now. But I challenge you to change your mind to the grid. Don't change the grid to your mind. Don't sit there and try to explain this away using 21st century sensibilities and culturalisms. The hard thing here is to say, yes, God is right in how he wants this handled. God is right. I am not. Our culture is not. God says in other places, my thoughts are not your thoughts and my ways are not your ways. There's even another scripture that says, you thought I was a man like you. We need to get God's thoughts, but sometimes they're not going to fit well, but get them anyway. It's important. Thank you.